ready to keep you company wherever you are. Carte Blanche, the podcast, brings you immersive, hard-hitting stories anytime, anywhere, every week.
Grab a coffee and get comfortable. It's time for another installment of the WholeWeek Wrap with Daily Maverick and Carte Blanche, where we bring you your weekly serving of the news that matters. Helping us break things down into bite-sized chunks is DM168 editor Heather Robertson, and there's a lot to digest. Here's what's coming your way. The ANC has a Zuma problem, and there's no easy fix.
How does someone believe that they are above the law? Who allowed that person to think that way? The ANC did.
Who's funding your political party of choice? We look at party donors and question their intentions. Then a unique approach to address South Africa's GBV crisis. And a massive win for South Africa's vultures. Let's get into it. Heather, welcome back to the WholeWeek Wrap with Daily Maverick and Carte Blanche. It feels like forever since our last chat. How have you been?
I've been great, thanks. Had a great break from the news cycle and have been back for the last 2 weeks.
So before we get into the meaty bits of today's show, I want us to just quickly talk about the doomsday clock. I'm kind of thinking, let's get the really depressing news out of the way first. So sadly, according to scientists at the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, yes, it's a mouthful, confirmed that things haven't improved much in the last year. We're still only 90 seconds away from midnight, and they've cited several factors, including the nuclear threats that are developing across the world, dismal climate change outlook, the dangers of AI, global unrest. I want to know from you, what are your thoughts on the doomsday clock?
The good news is that we're still at 90 seconds.
Yes.
Same as the year before, right? But the bad news is we have allowed ourselves as humans to lose sight of the fact that we are a very expendable species. And by this, I mean the planet is going to be fine without us. And the 90 seconds is not for the planet, it's for us as humans. We're going to blow each other up with these nuclear warheads that countries like Russia, America, China, India, Iran are all, scurrying to improve on. If we can allow that to happen, then it's tickets for us as humans. But the good news is that it's not tickets for the planet. That will give place for the planet to renew itself. And I really think humans should catch a wake up. We're the apex species, and we supposedly have intelligence, but we're not really exhibiting it very well, because look at the number of wars that are happening out there, and look at how we cannot actually seem to live with difference. It's great that the scientists have put this out, because 90 seconds away from someone pressing a button that's going to start another doomsday scenario feels exactly the way I felt when I was a teenager in the 1980s, when the Cold War was still raging. We've not moved in 40 years. We know we need a planet that can actually support all of us. But if we continue doing this, it'll be like those zombie apocalypse movies.
Well, for those listening in, maybe not entirely sure what this doomsday clock is, it's not an actual clock, it's more a symbolic representation of our various failings as humans.
Yes.
And I mean, it's been around for a very long time, since like the 1940s, when the threat of nuclear weapons became all too real. It's also a reminder that nothing is set in stone. Just because we are at 90 seconds doesn't mean we can't take it back to, let's say, just 100 seconds. Or at one point, it was at 17 minutes to midnight, which was massive when they signed various nuclear deals. So, I mean, it's possible, it can inspire us, but we really, really, as humanity, as a collective, need a wake-up call, and very quickly. Once held up by the ANC as, quote, the savior for the country's economic woes and a committed communist, the ruling party stood firmly by former President Jacob Zuma's side through a myriad of scandals. There was the arms deal, rape charges, Nkandla, his anti-gay sentiments, and state capture. But it seems the ANC has had enough, especially now that Zuma has seemingly turned on his political home by endorsing the newly formed MK party. So, what's an already fractured ANC to do? You recently suggested we talk about former ANC member Mbazima Shilowa's recent comments on Jacob Zuma. I mean, it was a damning piece of writing in which he essentially says the ANC only has itself to blame for Zuma's very clear attempts to, as Shilowa puts it, devour the ruling party. What struck you about this, what I would call an open letter to the ANC, in which he basically tries to tell them, I told you so?
Absolutely. I mean, remember, he was part of the breakaway from the ANC when the ANC voted Zuma as leader in Polokwane in 2008. And he's originally from Carte. He's a former premier of Gauteng. And remember, he went off to form COPE, but that didn't last very long. But does know, what happened within the ANC that led them to support. So the left wing of the ANC were very upset with Thabo Mbeki, feeling that he'd gone to middle of the road, neoliberal, that he was more pro-business and anti-worker. And then the point that Cyril makes that really, really, really made me laugh was that, and then the ANC goes and chooses the greediest, money-hungry person as a figurehead for the left, for the workers. Someone who actually, really doesn't give a toss about the workers, was all about himself. And yet the ANC went ahead and supported him again and again and again.
And so defended him.
Defended his excess, supported him with Nkandla, the Gupta flying in the Waterkloof Air Base, the supporting of his son, Duduzane. The ANC just in Parliament, supported too. So he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. The ANC created Jacob Zuma, and the ANC kicked out those who were questioning it. And then look what happened in 2021. When Justice Zondo put his foot down and said, you will appear, and he refuses. He thinks it's above the law. It really does. How does someone believe that they are above the law? Who allowed that person to think that way? The ANC did. And why did they? Because it's a culture of patronage. We support him, he'll support us. And
he brought in the voters as well.
Yeah. Yes, he brought in. But this is the thing that really is disturbing, is how voters have been hoodwinked. He was lovely, he was cuddly and warm and many wives. And hey, he's like the common man. Yeah. And look where the common man has led us to. He's gone against the very party that actually raised him, that grew his reputation. And he's saying he's not leaving it, but he's campaigning for another party. On what planet? Planet ANC, this happens.
Someone wrote actually that, we mustn't look at Zuma as simply an ANC problem at this stage, but it's a South African problem now. And the problem is that the ANC seems wholly paralyzed in handling the Zuma matter, especially now with the looming elections. So how do they juggle this and get out of this unscathed? I can't really see it going well for them whichever way they go.
I can't see it as well. But it looks like the ANC and KZN, they've sent friends of his to try and convince him unsuccessfully. And it seems like what's happening is they're now actually totally distancing themselves from him without suspending him. Because he plays the victim. So I can understand why they wouldn't suspend him, because they're like, you see, the ANC's turned against me. So it seems like they're giving him enough rope to hang himself, basically.
Yeah.
If you're an ANC supporter and, with him out of the ANC, will the ANC get the same support? Would it increase support for the IFP? I think it's fascinating. It could be to the favor of the ANC, because they make it and they said, this is the new ANC. It's like, we said that we're trying to renew ourselves. He's not part of us. Look what he did. He was part of state capture and all these people and behind the riots of 2021. Although it was the ANC. I'm sorry to say, it was the ANC that gave this country Jacob Zuma. So
politics is big business and it attracts big funders. And we're not talking a few thousand rands here and there. Some of South Africa's biggest parties are receiving tens of millions of rands from private donors to further their campaigns with one ambition: national or provincial victory. From mining magnates to banking bigwigs, a lot of money is being pumped into the electioneering game right now. But at what cost? So I want to stick with politics, and I want to kind of talk about the business of politics. News 24 journalist Carol Patton published a fascinating piece on donors bankrolling SA's opposition parties, how much influence they maybe have, and it just made me really think a little bit differently about the elections and about the future of politics in South Africa. Because we know the private sector has made it clear numerous times that, should the trajectory of SA politics not change soon, we're destined for collapse. So how much influence do you think donors from the private sector have in party decisions? Because based on Carol's article, it seems like there's quite a lot of conversations happening behind closed doors about policy making, who should be the next leader of, in her example, the DA. And it's so interesting.
So, let's go right back to the Nationalist Party. Businesses supported the Nationalist Party because, what is business's chief interest? To make a profit. There are rare businesses who care about this country, who care about its people. But I found that story so fascinating because, on the one hand, when the ANC came to power, very clearly, and this is the beginning of the ANC's engagement with corruption, I would say. Very early on, businesses from all over were wooing various ANC politicians. So let's not kid ourselves. And so, in an instance when the people that businesses did support didn't turn out the way they had expected, because everybody wanted a turn to eat. Everyone in the ANC wanted a turn to eat, not just the select few that the businesses chose, to pump up. And that led to the devouring of our local government departments. It has led to the collapse of our civil service, of the ability of government to actually to deliver. So I can see these businesses sitting back and going like, okay, that was a failed experiment. What next? In Carol's story, it seems, and I have to admit I have heard this, is that these few very wealthy businessmen have been in their different various think tanks, dinner parties, whatever, saying that we would like the DA to be in charge. But the thing is, do they not understand what a democracy actually is? Whether we like it or not. What the DA has done, saying things like Mmusi Maimane was a failed experiment. We were told that we need to get black leadership to win more votes, and it didn't work out. How hard did they actually try? That they've given up on it and they've called Mmusi a failed. How disgusting is it to say that to another human being? Now the new experiment is John Steenhuisen. And here, reading Carol's story, it seems to be that business is saying John is a failed experiment. He's not a person that we want to lead. Let's catapult one of our own. And who is the one of our own? Roger Jardine, because he's
former
got something.
The former first strand chair, yes.
I find it very cynical. I take my hat off to Steenhuisen to say, we had talks and there were 3 meetings and then we felt very uncomfortable. It's kind of like, yes, you run a business, you own a business, you've either earned your wealth in this generation or you've got generational wealth behind you. That's very different from forming a political party and going out on the hustings and campaigning and arguing and coming up with proper policies and getting your party to agree to it. That's not an easy job. That's politics. It's almost like these business people think you can just catapult politicians in and make them do your bidding. This is the thing. Are they there for we the people, or are they there for the interests of very wealthy people? The few very wealthy people who are part of the Gini coefficient that has such massive divide between the haves and the have-nots in this country. So this is the point. Whose policy is this actually? Because I can guarantee you that there are people funding the EFF for a particular idea. Every single party has a lobbyist. What happens to what is good for the people of this country? Quite frankly, I can't see anyone really representing the interest of ordinary South Africans.
Because if you have an individual giving 30 million rands to one political party, I cannot help but question what the fine print is behind that, because that's a lot of money.
What policy are you pushing for? Yeah?
Yes, exactly. In the realm of psychotherapy, no person is the same. What works for one individual might not be as effective for the next. So when it comes to addressing gender-based violence within communities, finding a one-size-fits-all method can be tricky. But one psychologist is bringing a unique approach that speaks directly to the cultural complexities often underlying the GBV crisis in South Africa. And it's proving to be a huge success. Then we celebrate the completion of the first phase of the biggest vulture relocation project ever undertaken on the African continent. So I think after all of that, we genuinely need to get into our green shoots. And
yes,
we have two really heartwarming stories. I came across this amazing initiative that started in 2016. It's called Phola, meaning to heal or cool down. And the concept is fairly simple, but the impact is monumental. We have psychologist Nkazelo Nkube Mlilo, who's traveling across Johannesburg in a caravan to help women, families, and communities to address and process the various impacts of gender-based violence, which we both know is a massive problem in our country. They refer to their counseling approach as, quote, culturally appropriate. And this essentially means that their team addresses elements of mental health stigma, family and patriarchy, and masculinity, and they talk about all of these things. And it's all run from a caravan and shipping containers, because this concept is now really lifting off and spreading. And I just think it's a fantastic initiative.
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, what really struck me is Women Lila saying, I've been trained in Western psychology, and then realizing when she went back to Zimbabwe, I think she was working with kids affected by AIDS, that the kids didn't want to talk and they wouldn't open up, and that she had to find other ways of getting them to open up. And then she connected with the psychologist who was working with Aborigines in Australia, and realized that you've got to actually adapt to be culturally specific, to use narrative storytelling. And she came up with this concept of the tree of life, which is quite amazing. It's like as a way of people telling their stories and being open enough to say, the roots of my tree began here. There's often the stigma of but I'm bringing down my family by speaking about this shameful thing, and that I'm a bad person because I've allowed this to happen to me. One of the women who've been through her therapy says at the end, I actually feel for my abuser because I know he has his own problems, but it's not my duty to heal him. I'm here and I've come to this place to heal myself, and I am now strong enough.
And I also really appreciate that the team is clearly trying to bring solutions by, educating boys and men about what they refer to as harmful masculinity. And I think to date they've reached well over 2,000 men who are now paying it forward. So speaking of healing, our other green shoot is more about healing nature. And this is a quick throw forward to a story that we've just recently filmed. And it's the first phase of the largest ever relocation of vultures. And it was a huge success. It was completed earlier this month, where 160 Cape and African white-backed vultures were moved from Africa's only vulture conservation organization called Vulpro to a location in Hartbeespoort. We all know that vultures and other raptors are facing widespread collapse due to poison, poaching, habitat loss. What an achievement for these wonderful birds.
It's quite funny. I think there's a lot of superstition around vultures.
Yes.
I mean, I remember when I worked in the Eastern Cape, vultures, being caught and used for muti. So the fact that we're actually taking cognizance of the role that vultures play in dealing with dead carcasses, and basically cleaning up so that germs and bacteria and viruses don't actually affect rivers and food system and other animals. We are so removed from nature that we don't realize the value. They're not the most beautiful birds, right?
Yes.
And
they're not the models.
They're not the supermodels of the bird kingdom, but they do play a really important role in cleaning up animal conservation. Yeah, it's fantastic work that there is an organization that is looking at not just the moving, but also looking into breeding as well.
Well, Heather, I love your passionate commentary. You really bring such a very real and human perspective to these stories. I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much.
And that's a wrap. In case you missed any of our previous chats with Daily Maverick, you can find them all on Carte Blanche, the podcast, available on Spotify and all major podcasting platforms.